welcome to Frank Schuil. Is that correct?
I won't. I won't hurt you by having to pronounce my name. It's Schuil.
Okay, it sounds very
Exactly.
Dutch. Sounds very
It
Dutch.
is very Dutch.
So,
I never force anyone to try to pronounce my name. Schuil, Schuli. I've heard Schuil. It's all good.
well, apologies because I didn't get it right. And Frank is you're the CEO of Safello, which is I would normally say Bitcoin exchange, but now you're crypto exchange. It's more general, isn't it? As I understand it.
We've been a crypto exchange, I would say, for quite a few years now. I mean, we got the first multi-crypto support. I'm going to say 2018, maybe. So it's been crypto for a little bit longer than Bitcoin.
Okay. Well,
are you a maximalist?
I'm both a maximalist and a minimalist because I believe that you have to have two competing ideas in your head always.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there's definitely innovation across the board. So, like, if you're just believing that everything will gravitate toward Bitcoin, or it should, then still it can always absorb those innovations that are happening around it.
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. Yeah.
Very few commercial companies are only Bitcoin these days, especially in the exchange side. I don't think there's anyone who's just offering Bitcoin.
Yeah, that's correct. That's very true. I mean, actually, this is a part I hope we can discuss further on. I mean, I think just to start, could you explain to people who've never heard of Safello what you do?
Apart from what we're the oldest, we're one of the oldest exchanges no one's ever heard of. I guess no. I mean, we were founded a long time ago, just before the peak of the 2013 bull market. At that time, it's a long time ago. You had like MTGOX, which had 80% of the trading volume, which was started at Magic the Gathering play card exchange platform turned crypto platform, which ultimately got hacked and everybody lost their money. I think 700 million, $1 billion, whatever was lost there.
I was one of them. Yeah.
I think I remember that.
Yeah.
Didn't you have the synthetic or the did you at some point exchange it to the BTC with a claim to MTGOX? Because there were some people who gave up their BTC coins on MTGOX to get like a discounted copycat.
Yeah.
That was a thing.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, I remember that, and I just thought I just didn't understand it. So I thought I don't want to do something I don't understand. So I left it in BTC. And I can remember mailing Mark Capellis.
Right.
And trying to sort it out because I had some money stuck like a few days before. Yeah. And he was really polite and he answered. And he was always quite polite, actually.
I think he's a nice guy. He's just was way in over his head, right? So,
yeah,
but, I think so. That experience I only had with, I got it out of MTGOX before then, so I got lucky there.
I did the opposite.
and I managed to do the same with Cryptsy. So Cryptsy, for those who don't remember, was like the first sort of altcoin exchange that was supporting all the different competing cryptocurrencies, and the writing started being on the wall there as well. And I think I didn't have a lot there, but I think I managed to just get it out before sort of it collapsed as well. Not your keys, not your money, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And you know what? And people don't learn that to this day. And now it's 100 times worse than it was then.
I would say on an infrastructure level, it's so much better than it was then. So if you go with the tier 1 exchanges, let's say a Bitstamp, it's using all the right technology, and on a trading level, it's using Nasdaq technology. In my view, you don't have a lot to worry about. But if you go into like DeFi contracts with some shady DAO, then you have the the same type of risk. And if you don't check whether there's an HTTP certificate on the website that you're visiting, and you get into a phishing attack, even if you have it on a hardware wallet, but you're still interacting with like DeFi contracts, there's still this risk that you lose your money anyway, right?
Yeah, I kind of remember like a couple of weeks before MTGOX went down, and I think it was my last chance to get my coins out. And I remember listening to a podcast just like this with two guys who I thought were so clever. And they said, no, MTGOX is going to come out of this even stronger. They're just too big to fail. I still remember that. And I was like, oh,
yeah.
you know, they got me. They got me.
It's interesting. I mean, the first transfer I made was, I think, via some Polish bank account, and then it went to the Japanese exchange. It was obviously the flow of funds was always abnormal from anything you're used to in a regular financial world. But then that's sort of what you had to do. There was no other way. Like, but they just didn't. I remember it was actually Roger Ver who went on camera, who also said, like, I've just been to the offices, everything looked fine, which has haunted him ever since, of course. But it's like there were no bad intentions as far like as anyone could tell. It's just well, I do remember from a security protocol, I think it came down to Mark Karpelès being the only person who had access to the coins entirely or something like that. The security model was also deeply flawed around how they were running it. I think Peter McCormack, he talked to everybody from the early days. They did a good deconstruction on that time period in what Bitcoin did, for those who are interested in the background on that story. Anyway, that's when we were around that time is when we were founded. I guess I was saying, and we were founded as the Safello, the Safello into the crypto market to be the alternative to those companies that were not necessarily doing things by the book. And I guess we raised the first investment round then that actually included Eric Voorhees, Roger Ver, Nicholas Carey from Blockchain, and some other like traditional angels and some really great names.
But for disclaimer, I was there. I was part of it, and I haven't sold a single share.
Well, was it the first one? And no, it was the crowdfunding round, right? Or no?
No, it was before that. It was the first one, and I haven't. I haven't sold a single share since then. And I believe you're going to go to places. Yeah, I remember why I chose you actually instead of other companies, because the other companies I thought were a lot further ahead with their products, but I thought that the crypto space, that trust was going to be the main currency. And I looked at your backgrounds of yourself and the other founders, and you were much more trustworthy than the other founders of the other companies, and that turned out to be a better decision.
Well, we still have a long way to go, and we've made a pretty great journey, and we've had many near-death experience. But I do think we're getting to the timing where these core principles of how we founded the company and how we're running the company, they are coming to a point where they're becoming increasingly important. And if you look at that from a regulatory point of view, with the MiCA regulations coming into effect, I mean, we look at that and we see 6,008 banks that you have in Europe alone. All of them will need to have a crypto strategy. And okay, how many of those have teams that can build it? How many of those that have the teams want to do it themselves, want to have it on their balance sheets, and then you have a go-to-market issue? It's like a very small number of companies. So we think that is going to be the playing field where finally, having that trust layer that we built over now almost 9 years is paying off. Let alone that our traction has been pretty good over the last couple of years once we found the product market fit, where most of those other years, right after we raised that first round of funding, I mean, we basically had a 4-year bear market, which was just struggling for survival. And I mean, I guess credit to sort of Digital Currency Group, who did the convertible right after, because it's Barry's and is a company that I think kept us afloat during those times. And then we did the crowdfunding rounds as well. But it was tough. But yeah, here we are. We're now publicly traded Nasdaq, and we've been doing year-over-year growth, I think 75%. And now I can't say the percentage, but if you look at the quarterly reports of the last year, obviously we've been outperforming 2020. So it's been going definitely in the right direction. And we've been able to triple sort of almost a team last year. Triple the team.
How many people now? How many people are there?
Around 30. So Yeah. So I mean, we were very small and nimble, but very efficient in what we did. But having a little bit more punching power means that we can innovate faster. So especially if you look at the round of iterations we do around the mobile application and the functionality we're able to put out. Yeah, that's kind of the rate of innovation required to both keep up, but also stay the market leader. Because in Sweden we're the market leader, but to become the clear leader not only in Sweden but also in other jurisdictions, you just need to keep up with that innovation pace. And we have great partners for that as well, like Fireblocks, for instance, on the custody side.
Fireblocks,
yeah, and on the liquidity side.
Fireblocks is going gangbusters, aren't they? Because everyone
Yeah.
is a trading desk. Yeah.
And they just closed the Series C, like $500 million or $550 million.
Yeah,
so it's interesting because the other ones got picked off the market, like Bitco by Galaxy Digital. Am I saying it right? Yeah. And then you had Curve that was it bought by PayPal, I think. So you have so few players left. And Fireblocks has just gone their own way and just raised more money, which I think is a more interesting path to just stay independent and facilitate infrastructure to the entire industry. And it's really hard to keep up with that, the scale of it and the innovation pace. So they've reached, just like in my view, Chainalysis done with the crypto forensic side, which is also a partner of us. You reach that level where it's really hard for competition to catch up to the same depth and level in the database that they have in that case for mapping out all the different data points on illicit activity on the blockchain and the connections that they have with all the authorities that they're integrated with. You just get this data set that's hard to beat. And I think similar things have been happening with Fireblocks, but then from an infrastructure level.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the functionality of Fireblocks, I mean, I know companies here who use it, and I mean, it's almost like the standard now for most crypto companies.
Yeah, and you have that on like sort of infrastructure level. You have that, of course, on hosting it yourself. You have that with Ethereum on Ethereum, and you have some of these platforms that really get these kind of. It's not necessarily good to have monopolistic situations in a decentralized world, but as a business, they've done pretty amazingly. And of course, you have Elliptic as well, which I think have done phenomenal work as well. But between Elliptic and Chainalysis, you have Verlega Chain, but it's really like there's still like a difference in the amount of data that they have and the way they are tapped into all the data sources that are feeding them with new data. And Fireblocks, I mean, they have now $1 billion in funding and commercial. It's pretty good.
So can I take a step back now? So during the journey of Safello, you said there was a lot of near-death experiences. Is that something you can talk about, or is it?
Well, I mean, more in like capital, right? So how do you keep a company financially going when you're having a volatile business and like a business built on volatility and there's just no trading action? So I mean, there are plenty of traditional startup struggles that we went through. A large one had to do with our expansion efforts. We've been in Europe several times, and we were the first one in the United Kingdom where we opened up bank accounts via existing banking partner. And we had those bank accounts open and announced it to the world. In that time period that we had it open, which was about 6 weeks, that volume in the United Kingdom was taking over a volume in Sweden. So it was a great success. Wow. And I was on track. Like it's like within this 2 weeks, it was 25%. And you saw like, okay, give it 1-2 weeks more and it's overtaking it. But then, the classic thing happened. The bank in Sweden couldn't shut it down, and in Norway and Denmark. But in the UK, our capital mistake was that we announced it to the world. We should have just silently worked on it and just not announced it to the world. A lesson learned to a certain degree. But since we did, that bank was overwhelmed with requests of like, oh, can we open up as well? And I think that drew the attention all the way to probably board level. And then they said, okay, we need to stop it down. Didn't have to do. There was still, if you look at the termination letter, there was nothing related to our compliance procedure or anything like that. It was they made a business decision not to support cryptocurrency businesses. I think that was the nature of the letter that we received, and so So that international expansion really was hindered. And there were several examples of that happened where it was kind of out of our hands. So in that case, we said, okay, but the UK is such an interesting market, let's push through. So we went into the Barclays accelerator with Techstars. And we basically came into the program with the premise of we want bank accounts. Like that's what we're here for, right? And we're pretty clear about that. But then the program is 3 months. After the first month of the program, I mean, credit to Barclays and Techstars because they managed to get like a meeting with the at Her Majesty's Treasury together with the FCA to have a real discussion about it. But it became clear, like, to create even a framework by which within, I think, the Innovation Hub, we would be able to do something. We're still a year out, and the program was 3 months to do something. So it was like, okay, this is not going to happen. We were stubborn enough to not give up. So the great thing that came out of it, that we find other commercial venues within the organization to see, okay, what is the lowest denominator that we could do something around crypto and do something with Barclays. And we did manage with great credit to the people within the program, like Simon Taylor and Derek White, that was the product owner, as well as Alex McLaren, who was like making all the connections within the organization, that we were able to pull off this Bitcoin proof of concept. And it was the first time that a tier 1 bank did anything around Bitcoin publicly, commercially. And it was, why did it work?
First time in Europe, was it? Or
I think it was the first time globally, at least. We didn't see anything. We didn't see anything.
This, yeah.
And it was like, still we are like in many of those reports looking back at the development of the industry and, you know, Barclays signing. It was at least global headlines. And I don't think up until then, any major bank had done, tier 1 bank had done anything like Bitcoin that way. And why did it work? Because it was done around charity. So we had developed a pretty cool concept at the time of foundations being able to raise money, the donation money in crypto. And we had already built that, and we partnered up with 3 different charities, and they had their landing pages receiving crypto to QR codes. Still one of the, I think, the coolest thing we did in a way. And we had Shifo, a Swedish organization. Oh my God, that we had the Lifeboat Foundation, which was like raising money for technological advancements. And I don't know, for those who are not familiar with Lifeboat Foundation, it's a very interesting organization looking at humanity as a whole and preventing sort of the ship sinking, which is why it's called Lifeboat. And then there was one, I think, I can't come up with a name right now, but they were building schools in Africa. And we raised that money, and then we obviously paid it out. And the idea was that in the future, like what you want on the next part, the next leg of the journey, you want to see at the funds that have been raised and how they're distributed to the final destination. And to the credit of Shivo, they're already doing that at that time, and today they're doing that as well, where they do a really thorough breakdown on how they're spending the money raised, right? So you get over that problem of the intransparent like ways that donations sometimes get spent and it goes to management layers and you don't know where it's going to. They have a very transparent way, and that was the part that we then wanted to do. But the proof of concept we did with Barclays was around the first part, and we partnered up through Barclays with what is it called? Venture for America, I think it's called, like around entrepreneurship in the US. So we created the donation pages there. And then we did part of the research was around looking into the ISO formats and what the reconciliation potential was with existing ERP systems.
Into the what format? Sorry, I didn't get it.
It was a specific ISO format on ISO on accounting standards.
Okay, yeah.
And we did research into looking at how the Bitcoin transactions would fit that standard. And so we wrote a whole. So the public part was mostly around the foundation pages, but on the back of it, we did some research into looking in how you could reconcile these donations from an accounting perspective.
But
with the notion.
Could I just check though, for my education, why was that important though? Was it
because it would bridge like crypto with existing financial systems, right? From an accounting principle. Okay. So they were trying to see, okay, if you look at this like from a research point of view, where does it get problematic? So the biggest the silliest sort of problematic part of it is the 8 decimals that Bitcoin represent in accounting systems.
Okay.
That's one of the
is that a problem in accounting systems?
I think one of the conclusions we had, I don't know if we open sourced that paper in the end. We may have, but one of the conclusions was that I think the decimal support was like until 8 decimals or something in that format, ISO format, and I think now.
It's because sats are so small. You mean because it's 100 million sats in the Bitcoin?
Exactly.
Okay, so, I get it. Yeah.
So now, how many is it? It's 8. It's 8 in crypto, or is it 12 in crypto? Now I'm 9.
Well, it changes every time the price goes up.
Sure, but the amount of decimals is limited, right? How is it 8?
The amount of decimals. Yeah, it's 100 million. It's what 6, 7, 8 zeros and a 1.
Yeah, and I think the ERP systems were limited to 4 maybe, or something of that nature. I remember. So I was like, all right, this is like the biggest, and because then you would need different denominations in like what people have been trying over the years. It's like, okay, instead of having 0.0001 Bitcoin, can we use 100 bits or like that? So we've tried it at some point in our lifetime when we were creating our first version of a non-custodial wallet, where we also try to create different denominations. But the reality is, it doesn't quite resonate with people. It's like, it's still like, oh, okay. It's still such a simple problem that it persists today. It's like, oh, can I buy a portion of a Bitcoin? Yes, you can. Like, it's measured as Satoshi.
I didn't even think about it. Yeah. That's why I see some things measured only in sats.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I didn't even think I didn't think about it as a problem, but it's obvious. Most accounting systems, why would they have more than a couple of digits? There's no point.
Yeah. And for you, like for people, it's like also psychologically this notion of 0.0001 Bitcoin. That's why people still often measure in US dollar or fiat denomination, because the notion of what 0.0001 whatever X amount Satoshi means in terms of real life value, you can't get a feeling for that. So that's why the 100 bits was like bits and kilobits. I don't know I should know the denominations, but whatever people are using, it never caught on. You think you have some data statistics website where it's used, and I think maybe from an accounting perspective it might be used, but in terms of what everyday people are sending around, it's still like 0.0001, and then people look at what is the dollar denomination, or so it's still an issue.
So you did this research into the ISA formats and transferring between sats and money, and then what happened?
Right. And well, in the last part of that, like, so and that's a bit of the sad part of the story, because that was great and it was so cool to do it, even though it was completely outside the focus area of Safello. Why we came into the program, It was still, it was still a nice milestone. But the second leg of that, which we never were able to execute on, is then taking those donations and, looking at the distribution, because there it would get actually quite interesting, because then you could work with NGOs around the world to say, okay, here we have, 1 Bitcoin that needs to be arriving on in this location and needs to be distributed in a decentralized way, but totally trackable. And there were some really interesting cases. Well, like also, if we're looking, for instance, in emergency situations, the biggest part of the problems in emergency situations isn't necessarily the raising of the funds. There's typically like enough funds. It's getting the funds on the ground to do the things that need to be done. And the same with the goods. It's actually a distribution problem. So one of the things that crypto, and I think there have been now since then been cases on UN level, some initiatives with looking at the distribution problem and say, okay, well, if this is a phone and I can connect identity to that phone, then I can just airdrop that crypto to that person and can trace it later on if you have it connected to a blockchain. So from that deposit, where normally if it's a mobile minutes deposit or a cash deposit, then it's untraceable. But if you actually do it in crypto and that becomes like its local economy in those kind of situations, then you don't have that issue, right? You can continue tracking it as long as it keeps, if it's truly on a blockchain, because all the movement of funds, and it becomes a peer-to-peer transaction system, which is also why people have been looking at mesh networks as opposed to and that's why what Blockstream has been doing with firing up satellites in the air is important in a way, because when you get in emergency situations or you get in, low connectivity areas, then how do you maintain the blockchain? And, you have some example of mesh networks working in, for instance, Hong Kong during the protest, the Hong Kong protest. And those systems can work, but I think, if we're looking at Starlink, of course, what Blockstream is doing with their own satellite, but if you can then extend that with, let's say, Starlink would maintain a blockchain network, then wherever you are in the world, you could have that instant verifiability of the crypto transactions.
Is it fair to say you were trying to invent the dream of DeFi and the wallets actually being a proper crypto wallet globally, but ahead of your time?
Wait, we never did this, right? So that was like what we wanted to do. And I'm just describing the problem space, but like we wanted to do that. But that's unfortunately what happens in large organizations. Then leadership changes. The people that were like the pioneers for moving that forward, they moved to different position outside the organization. And since we didn't get to do what we wanted to do in the first place, which is to get bank accounts, we didn't really stuck around in the UK. We went back to Sweden and went back to a core business.
Yeah, I saw that. So yeah, you got back into. So I noticed you were then Swedish only, and then what happened after that? And it'd be nice to talk about what led up to your IPO and how that felt, because that was quite amazing for me, I think.
Right. So, I mean, the biggest turn, there's all kinds of different things we try to make things move, and a lot of struggles. A lot of the early struggles on the banking side, on the payment service provider side. Well, we were a little bit too early. And the funding problem as well, in a way, which is sort of propagated by some failures in the Nordics, early failures, which was a little bit of a freeze on the investment climate. So it goes for most crypto companies. So there's interesting development for the Nordics as such, is that, like, why are all the Swedish crypto companies and Nordic crypto companies listed? That's not necessarily the case across the world. But in Sweden alone, you have or like the First North, you have like 5 different cryptocurrency companies. Part of that is that there has been an overly negative investment climate on crypto. So a lot of money has gone to fintech and there, but there's not been that same capital available for the crypto market, which can go, we can talk forever about why that is. But for us, we did manage to raise money on the back of sort of the 2017 height, where we were able to raise money from White Star Capital and North Zone, leading the rounds, which was in conjunction with the acquisition that we did at Crix at the time. And then we finally had some punching power to define a strategy to execute on. And we looked at everything. At that time, it was the peak of the ICO hype. And we did have like a whole token paper available to go that route. We looked at stable coins, or our own stable coin creation, and our own STO.
That's interesting for me, the stable coins as well, but we'll come back to that.
I still think it's an interesting European problem space that hasn't really been resolved. But in looking at the options there, and it was we saw that, again, coming to the core principles of what we founded on, if we were to do an STO, or not an STO, but we call it the SFL, the same as the ticker that we have today, SFL token, which is why it was, for me, kind of a not to the token paper that we created then to have the same ticker symbol. Unfortunately, now the ticker also has a Nasdaq shipping company, which I wasn't aware of. A little bit of a flaw on our end on that one, but so if you go $SFL, you get a whole bunch of shipping information on Twitter. But the notion of the token itself was more like, okay, this is going to be a regulatory nightmare. There's no clarity, and it's actually going to ruin the reputation that hinders our long-term vision of what we want to do with the company. So we said, okay, we're not going to do that. We looked at STOs, and we came to the same conclusion that many others have done, is that if you're doing STO, what is the point, sort of, because you want distribution. And you only get distribution if you don't need to do it in a regulated sort of way. You can just distribute it like a regular cryptocurrency.
So can I ask you a question on there?
Yeah.
Did you ever consider moving to a more crypto-friendly country or something? Or was that,
yes, but no.
You can say no comment as well.
No. So we've always looked at different jurisdictions, but again, we've been very for better or worse, we've been very principled about the long-term vision. And in order to serve ultimately the type of customers that we think we can and hopefully will serve in the foreseeable future, having a setup in Gibraltar or like, some easier jurisdiction where you can maybe expand better, which is more associated with less regulated space, doesn't help what we want to portray and how we want to build trust, because everything has been about building a trust. It's been a trust building exercise, and it also goes in how we work with the authorities and how we, the investment that's gone into the regulatory space is completely invisible to everyone. But we have been pretty hands-on on regulatory matters. We've been hands-on on educating authorities behind the scenes. We've been doing way more than strictly necessarily on some investigations to help and assist. All of that will and is like more like now and the last years has been paying off. But it's also one of the reasons why you do not want to be in a jurisdiction that people associate with, a different kind of business, or not like fully regulated business, not a business that cares about compliance and following sort of that framework. So for that reason, we haven't done it. We did look into it at times where we thought, okay, like, scalability needs to go faster. And now it doesn't matter so much anymore, because we know that MiCA is coming, which is going to streamline it, at least on a European level.
So what's coming? Could you explain
MiCA, the market in crypto assets regulation, if I said it correctly. So the European Council has accepted that to come into effect, which means that there will be a license that companies need to, so local jurisdictions need to follow the European directive on MiCA. So that means that's going to be implemented. And then that will be a passportable license. Whereas the biggest problem with internationalization has also been that there is no overarching sort of European regulatory framework, which means that everybody had to do it on a local country by country basis. And then some people have gone for different licenses that might be valid in one jurisdiction and then operated as if it's valid everywhere. But that's no longer applicable either, because on a European level, it's required to have where that local regulation jurisdictions need to have a framework in place for companies to at least register with the authorities. So where before you could go with a registration in one country, basically serve the rest of Europe, and that was sort of allowed because there was no requirement to register. So Denmark had that for the longest time. Now, basically, all jurisdictions in Europe require registration, and then with MiCA regulation, it's got to be a license, so that you need to be licensed there. So, yeah, but in the meantime, if you really want to do it by the books, you would need to have a BaFin registration. You need to have like AFM in the Netherlands. You need to have registrations everywhere. So still, like.
When do you see it coming in, though? Like EU wide. When do you see the common regulation coming EU?
All right, I should ask our head of compliance, who's way more into this. But I think it's been accepted by the European Council, so it could already be passing on to local jurisdictions, I suppose, as early as this year, if not next year. Where it's going to be enforced, I think, is then 24. So if you have an existing registration, you could probably use that registration until sometime 24, right? So they normally have for like a period where you go from whatever you have today to the next requirement. So if you have a registration today, then you need to apply to the new one, and then you need to have that in place before the transition period is over. So where were we?
Yeah. So okay, let's follow. So you're telling about a lot of the stuff that you went through as a company and what you explored, and what was it like when you finally got into the IPO? How did that feel?
Oh yeah, I guess the lead up is that we finally found the path that we did decide on in 2018 after we raised the funding. And so that was not stablecoin, not STO, because you might as well do an IPO. And we basically went back to basics, but then really focused on it. So we did the opposite, and we see some other companies do that recently as well, is that we say, okay, we're not going to do Europe, we're going to do Sweden, and we're going to do Sweden really, really well. And we're going to showcase as well that if you do it really well, you can penetrate that market much deeper than, one would think. And I really do think we've proven that. And once we got the product market right fit in 2018, we did a combination of the widget, which people could integrate in their website, and our own very fast onboarding with, in Sweden, you have Bank ID, which is a very fast way to identify yourself, and a Swish, which is a local payment method, which has almost the entire population is using that payment method. That combination then takes an onboarding experience from several days down to 30 to 60 seconds. That was a really winning combination, which we were only able to achieve because we've built a long relationship to be able to obtain it. Today, we're the only company that has this combination, and all other crypto companies have lost it or they never obtained it. There's our biggest competitor that we had just lost their top 4 bank account, and they lost Swish. And the other one was already sort of pushed out of the Swedish banking system, I think last year. But the sacrifice that we had to do is that we also had to focus on the Swedish jurisdiction. But because of that, we're now the growth rate has been great, up and to the right. With the numbers are obviously in the annual report. We're the market leader on I think on all metrics that matter. We acquired Bitcoin.se, also the largest information website, sort of the Bitcoin.com of Sweden. So if you Google Bitcoin in Sweden, then you would have that as the first result above Wikipedia. And then we are on the most important keywords on the second spot and the first spot for Safello and Bitcoin.se as well. And with that, so growth, we got to the point is, okay, how do we grow from here? So we didn't. They're different. So as the venture capital actually didn't acknowledge our growth for the metrics that you would normally grow it.
Why was that? Is that a Scandinavian thing, a Nordic thing? Or?
It's not a sexy story, I think ultimately, and we will need to do our storytelling better, but it does come, in my view, to the storytelling of, we're doing an exchange. Okay, how long you've been around? So it's the story of just infrastructure, the way that we're doing it. It's kind of boring, and we've now embraced it by saying our slogan is boring is good, but it is. Compared to investing in, I don't know, an NFT project or some cool protocol, it's okay. So there's a class of companies that invest in it, but in those that look at that space, you want to see instant capacity to internationalize. You want to see you want to invest in a new hot shiny company necessarily, not the company that has figured it out after so many years, which was in our case the case. So since 2018. And then, and it's general for our market on this sector is really understanding the levers of what creates moat. And I've been arguing for a long time that our moat is really, really strong. And but nobody that comes outside the crypto space understands how valuable a top 4 banking relationship is, right? Unless now, as we've seen that all our competitors have lost it, and we're the only ones left with sort of a top 4 relationship, it becomes maybe more obvious, but even then, we don't yet see that reflected in how people perceive our stock. So it is the nuance, and then it comes back to sort of the venture capital climate, as I described earlier, which I think is still problematic. I think it's actually fine, except for infrastructure of this kind. I think it's moved on to protocols, Web3, shiny things. It's boring infrastructure stuff. It's harder to find. So and then when you get in a situation where you've been around long enough, then obviously you're making revenue because we've been organically growing and we were profitable. And then it's okay, where do you grow from there? You do need venture capital to accelerate, but the venture capital market is not necessarily acknowledging that growth, and it's not a sexy story. Okay, I get it. So then we have options: sell the business, or we've always found an angle throughout the years to survive and thrive despite all the adversity, whether it's a bank relationship, whether it's funding, or whatever it might be. And in this case, we had several companies looking to acquire us, and we got offers, but they were, not in line with what we think we had accomplished with the company. So then we concluded, okay, we should go public. And it was partly because our main competitor that I just mentioned did make an attempt to go public. So we also knew, and we saw other, and I think there was Coinbase had maybe announced it already. So not sure, but I think so. So it was like, okay, there is going to be a move towards the public market. And B, we're talking about the long game here of how we want to position the company towards financial institutions and those larger corporates. Then it's another layer of a validation for a partner that you want to work with. So no tier 2 or 3 exchange, we go for Nasdaq. So we know, again, we get the check mark from Nasdaq, we get the check mark also in the case from the regulator, again, that also needs to look at the prospectus before you can go to the public market. No direct listing, no reverse merger, a clean IPO.
No SPAC.
Yeah, it's not, it's pretty intense. Yeah. It's pretty intense. So again, it's doing it in a proper, clean way all the way through. It's always the hardest path.
Makes sense,
but so we did a super clean IPO. There we are. That was May last year, right? So then the interesting market dynamics happens that we IPO. We have an IPO price, and then there's the hype of the peak of the market, perpetuated by I guess the local crypto hype, local investor network that gets onboarded. I mean, it was ultimately Digital Currency Group, Northzone, and Whitestone Capital, our original investors that led the investment route, kind of semi-ironically, one could say. But we were able to manage to get them on board. And that created some kind of hype. So we had this peak off, but then that was the same time. We think the second week or something, the crypto market started crashing right before summer. So you had this an effect, and then we had another additional suppressing, in my view, but that's just an opinion, effect of a shareholder. That is used, I won't say which shareholder, but it was a shareholder that is used to selling in IPOs, large IPOs, where obviously you do small chunks to the order book to sell it down to lower your position. However, if you do that at a small cap, you basically suppress the entire stock. So we were close to recovery path, and then that happened.
Oh wow! Is that what happened? I didn't know that.
Well, it's not, you can't describe it to that single event, but it was at the bad timing. And however, if you look now back, all the crypto stocks that have been in the Swedish market, they've all gone down. And it goes for all technology stocks, which is really, it's quite sad, right? But we know it just takes time for people to look at the underlying dynamics. There's no... the underlying value of the companies and how are they performing. Look at the growth rate, look at the volume, look at the innovation rate. It's clear from some of the valuations that we're seeing, the way we believe we are valued is that people are just not doing that. And if you look at some of the communication in the sort of the investor channels, it's also clear that people really do not, just like sort of the investors we spoke to before, they really don't understand the nuances. They really don't necessarily understand the value of having Swish, the value of having that top 4 banking relationship and what it means and how much of a moat it is. So yeah.
I see it as a big moat. I mean, that's why I say I haven't sold a single share, so I don't intend to.
And we will work hard, to make that worth your while. At least I think for being a shareholder that long is that I don't tend to give up.
Yeah, no, I know that you definitely don't give up, and I was proud of you guys when you were ringing that bell, and it
was a nice moment. It was a proud moment, of course. Yeah. I still enjoyed that.
Yeah. Was it just like a video? Was it like a video screen or something in the background, or was it actually any? How was that?
No, we got the whole Nasdaq bell we were sitting at Epicenter, and we got the Nasdaq bell there to ring, and there was real confetti, and then there was the screen of the trading in the background, this big, the price. And
Oh,
that day it went well.
Were you in Stockholm or New York?
Stockholm, in Stockholm. No, yeah, they did project the image of Safello on Times Square.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah,
nice. It's a bit of a gimmick. They do that for all companies going public. Of course, if you're there, then it's cool to see it. But I wasn't there, so it's more like nice for the record. That,
it's still cool. It's
still cool. It's still cool. Yeah, it's a fun fact there.
Okay, so I guess the last thing I want to ask you about is where do you think the market's going? And if you can talk about future
easy question,
you probably can't. But where do you think things are going in 2022?
Oh, that's a good question.
I could say here, any views expressed here are not the views of our company.
I think so it's very easy on the innovation side. It's always hard on the market side, right? So if we just dissect those two and we focus on the innovation side, there's plenty of innovation continuing to happen. Like even now in the bear market-ish, like we don't know if it's a prolonged bear market, but the down turn in January, the NFT volume, for instance, still kept going. And there's no stopping, there's no slowing down of the level of innovation and the actual underlying growth, which just means that we have this infamous sort of comparison chart with user adoption of internet versus crypto and some other technologies, and it's perfectly in line to go towards 1 billion users. So I think you need to be really contrarian in a wrong way, I would say, to believe that it's not going to reach that number of 1 billion crypto users. So that is the long-term perspective. Okay, what timeline? Depends. Some developments can accelerate it. I think payments, if it's sorted out in a good way, connected to taxation or removing taxation in an ideal scenario like in El Salvador, can really start like accelerating some of those things. Legal tender in different jurisdictions is going to accelerate those type of things. Different type of UI improvements to simplify it. Adoption by financial institutions, hopefully powered by us, that will accelerate it. So I think there are a lot of like positive signals in the market from a macro level that are going to be having a positive impact and just continuing. And you can look at, for instance, the Mazzari report by Ryan Selkes to see at the level, the depth and breadth of innovation taking place. And I always like to tell people this small anecdote that I was in 2013 standing in this conference room in level 39 in London, where the entire crypto space was sort of in that one room. 200 people, I don't know how many people it was, and that's where I met I think it was Eric Voorhees and like Tuurdemeester and all of those guys were there, and then now even the tiniest DAO project can probably fill that room. It's so many people involved in this industry that it's just immeasurably large. Well, it's probably measurable, but it's large, and you can't. I love the attempt of the Mazzari report by making an attempt at that, but it's the speed of innovation becomes so fast that it's hard for one single person to keep tab of everything that's going on. And you have to specialize in where you put your attention when you look at it from an investment point of view, for instance. But innovation is going to steadily move towards 1 billion. The market side of things, that's much harder to predict. There's some catalyst that I think is going to spark something potentially, if nothing else happens on the macro geopolitical picture, when we look at the interest rates and so on, and we look at the, potential war, Ukraine, Russia, and how markets generally can respond to an actual war. Then you could look at things like Ethereum going to staking to finalize their transition. You can look at, I think, DAOs as a theme, like ICOs and then NFTs. Then I think DAO is going to be a theme, cross-chain compatibility.
Is this something, because I know a lot of crypto stuff like this is happening globally, but in Sweden, is this something which is big? Things like, do people buy NFTs, for example?
Oh, yeah. There's I think there's a lot of NFT projects and activity, like on the Safello show that we are now restarted up again.
Okay. I've seen a couple of episodes, yeah.
The founder from Mauer, who was from Forza, he's Swedish, and there's a lot of things going on there. It doesn't necessarily a lot of it is decentralized, right? So you often don't really get a handle at it unless you go to some decentralized like meetups and so on to meet the projects. A lot is happening, but it's
not in
necessarily
the news, but it's happened. These companies doing this stuff, you're saying?
Absolutely, and they do it globally. Like typically, if you have an NFT project, like why bother trying to explain it honestly to the Swedish media that has been overly negative generally, if you look historically, which is part of the perception problem in the Nordics. Why bother when you could just do a global project and you get global interest? You go to CoinDesk and you have your own Discord. I mean, it doesn't matter whether Swedes then know about that, or like they don't have to care about it. It's a global thing that people put in the market, particularly
doesn't
NFTs.
The government? Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, doesn't the government stop them? Because if you've got a DAO in Sweden, doesn't the government say no? You have to. I mean, you'd mentioned earlier about having a Safello token, and if you tomorrow, if you wanted a DAO and a Safello token under not SFL but some other token name, so you're not confused with someone else. But if you had your own token, would you even be allowed to do that, or would you be instantly shut down?
We are high profile, relatively speaking, right? So, and we obviously wouldn't do it unless it's completely. We're not going to destroy the 9 years of value and trust that we built just to do that project. But if your new project is starting out a new thing, then at what time is the government even going to find out that you're setting up a DAO? It's like, no, like by the time they're probably already worth $50 million or like $100 million. It's like, all right, then they put lawyers on it, they move jurisdiction. And I mean, so it's very appealing in a way, but of course, like there's many scams and problems like with all those kind of setups as well. Just like Wonderland, that was recently, I don't know if you followed that news.
Yeah.
There's this Canadian exchange guy convicted that which is both great, like in reality, like if somebody's convicted and done their time, that they can start a new project without being judged because they can do it in an anonymous way. But of course, the counterpart side is like, oh, you don't know who that anonymous person is. And you need to really trust. That is also a problem with DAOs, is that you cannot really trust the management of the DAO yet, because there's a centralized aspect on all DAOs, because the actual decision making, except for maybe Aragon, if it's done purely, is still often like, okay, you do a proposal, people can vote on it, but the teams that are building it still need to accept that proposal anyway. So it's like it's still humans in that process. I think it's going to improve, but a little bit hard.
I think that's one of the big things I've seen with DAOs is the decentralization part of crypto seems to be going away, because in effect, even with the multi-sig, there might be two people in cahoots controlling a DAO.
I think if properly distributed and for the right use cases, there's a lot of power in that decentralized voting mechanism. But for a lot of the DAOs and the type of projects that are being developed now, it doesn't add a lot of value, right? It's just the voting mechanism that doesn't, like, it's still a team that is running it that, okay, the DAO votes this, but okay, how is the treasury controlled? I think, which was the problem with Wonderland, like, and it's one or two people that are controlling it. So there's a lot of those practical problems. I do think it can be programmed in better, and it can be, the governance can be done in better. And ultimately, if it's done at scale in the right way, it can have like governance structures that you can't get around, which is better than things that are completely controlled by humans. But we're still far off from that. I mean, Aragon has done that. They really did at least think it through. Like, they have this decentralized judge system, right, that can then allocate it. But yeah, I don't know how many run Aragon on that level yet, where it's operational all the way from the bottom to the top. I've seen it whenever I've seen DAOs use kind of voting mechanisms, often to just control, like, hey, we have this interesting we have this treasury, we have this proposal. Do you think we should do this? Yes, no. Yeah. Okay, and you can vote with your stake tokens. Okay, great. Governance tokens.
I think, to be honest, I mean, I hold quite a few governance tokens, but I never vote on anything. I'm just like, I mean, I can't.
Nobody does, except those that have an incentive to push it in a certain direction. And I mean, an interesting thing is that is not only true in DAO organizations. If you look at the traditional regulatory space, like, for instance, Safello is a small, tiny company, has been able to sort of impact on what's written in final. I think we had some items on the MiCA regulation that made it to the drawing table, and I think in final draft. It's only because who's showing up to the table to do it, right? So and so it's not unique to DAO. Like if you look at the amount of, I think it took forever, even in the United States, to get the funding together to do proper lobbying. And then coincide was created, and you have companies worth like, I don't know, 40, 50, 60 billion dollar, and then the budget for like Coincenter was like $1 million a year. It's very interesting when you look really like, okay, who's willing to spend it. It's not obvious that people are putting in the time there. The similar was true with the Bitcoin protocol. The companies that were profiting the most from Bitcoin, like they weren't paying the core contributors, which ultimately what Blockstream I think did is that they just hired and paid core contributors just to work in the protocol, no questions asked, sort of. So yeah, it's kind of fascinating.
Okay. I guess we're running out of time now. So anything you'd like to add, and where can people find you? And
depends what they want. If they want to buy some crypto, sell some crypto, watch the market, then they should download our app probably. You can find the app link at safello.com. You can find it in the App Store, Android, by just typing in Safello. That's SAFELLO. If you want to find our stock, the ticker symbol is SFL, or you can find us as Safello Group. We're traded on Nasdaq First North. I think that's it. Yeah, we also have the Safello Show, which you can find on YouTube, and there are links. Oh yeah, we have the Discord channel that is on our landing page, safello.com, where you can join discussion, ask us anything, and we'll answer quickly.
Okay, I'll make sure I post all those links on the show. So
all right,
okay,
good.
And it's good to talk to you today, Frank. So have a good day.
Likewise.